I want to get married. Or rather, wanted. I'm married now. Yeah, big success. However, in order to get married, I disappeared for several months. So what happened during those months? Let's dive into it in this penultimate video of the Getting Married saga. So, to recap, when I last left off, Honey and my wedding planning progress looked like this. And by the time the wedding rolled around, it looked like this. Note, not everything got finished, but I'll get around to that. Let's start with the obvious, my last video before the break. Indeed, the Isles song was arranged and recorded. It only took 6 or 7 attempts to get the version I liked. Also, we ended up not having a flower girl, so I cut 8 bars from the arrangement. They only existed for our non-existent flower girl to walk. Next on the very important list was that we finally figured out our order of ceremony, or more specifically, the ceremony run sheet. This was becoming a major blocker. Our poor celebrant kept wondering where it was, and we really needed to get the ceremony booklets printed. Much like the vast bulk of the planning for the wedding, it really just came down to Honey and myself sitting down and figuring it out. It only took a couple of hours in the end. First, we figured out everything that was going to happen during the ceremony, then put it in an order that made sense. 2 Bible readings, 2 songs, a bit of talking, a bit of document signing, and then a group photo. When timing everything out, the ceremony looked to be around an hour and a bit, with some wiggle room around each item in case some ran fast and others ran slow. Speaking of run sheets, that was something that I had to put together, and boy was it a struggle. Run sheets have to be detailed. I ended up splitting ours into 15-minute increments, with 5-minute increments during the ceremony and the reception. It was more than just a what is happening during this time, but what individuals were doing what at specific times. Who is arriving where and when? Who is driving who? Is someone picking something up? Make sure it's on there, even if the bride and groom aren't where the action is being taken, or rather, especially if the bride and groom aren't there. Make sure the people that need to be there are listed explicitly and at the specific time they need to be there. Vendors want your run sheet too, so while I had an overall run sheet, I also split out vendor-specific items into their own run sheets. On the day, the run sheet is law. Kind of. It needs to be specific, yes, but it can't be so rigid that things won't go horribly awry if something runs long. Make sure you have gaps. If you're only giving yourself 15 minutes as a buffer, that's not enough. The tightest thing we had on our run sheet was moving from the door games to the ceremony, but even then we made sure that there was an hour-long gap for Honey to get there. She was supposed to arrive after me. Between the ceremony's planned end and the reception's planned start, we left a giant 4.5-hour gap, which allowed for food, transport, photographs, so on and so forth. That being said, if your wedding shares the same venue for ceremony and reception, then I can certainly imagine that would simplify things. So yeah, that was a big thing that was missing from the original plan. Sure, the order items in the plan were part of it, but there's so much more involved in creating a run sheet that I wasn't aware of. As for the ceremony music, I'm blessed with a variety of musically talented acquaintances and family members, so I put together a small band with some backup members and performed the songs along with them. Yep, I played the music at my own wedding ceremony. I mean, Honey and I picked the songs because I like to play them and she likes how they sound when I play them. I provided the charts, recorded myself playing them at the desired tempo, and so on and so forth. And I sent it out to the band members and scheduled a practice the night before, which, thankfully, went without a hitch. An additional bit of music that wasn't foreseen was something while Honey and I were signing the wedding documents. It slipped my mind during the creation of the plan, but thankfully a family member, who was a musician, offered their services, so that was, thankfully, easily covered. In the end, we ditched the custom vows. When the celebrant ran us through the vows he usually uses, they sounded good to us, so we went with them. Really, at that point, we were happy to not have to worry about something. Once again, Mama Blob swooped in to save the day with decorations, as well as several other things which I'll get into. We just ordered the flowers and she figured out everything else. It's a shame that I'm so keen on anonymity because how she set up the tables and all of that for the post-ceremony food was amazing. I mean, we helped, but she visualized it and planned it and made it all come together. Did I mention that she, along with some of the helpers, cooked all the food for the ceremony? I mean, she did, and it was a load off our minds, but it bears mentioning again how much of an incredible help she was. Photography is awkwardly part of the ceremony section, but yes, we did do the pre-shoot, which was lovely. Our photographer was lovely, her day plan, much like everything else, was rolled into the giant run sheet. Okay, next section, the bridal party. As a man, the best piece of advice I got for the entirety of the wedding planning was this: no one cares about how the groom looks. As long as you're not distracting from the bride, that's good enough. That piece of advice really helped focus my mind, and with the aid of a friend's employee discount, the groomsmen and I grabbed all of our suits in less than an hour and grabbed a cheeky Nando's once we were done. Funnily enough, we were all pretty much the exact same body type, and what we found fit well enough that no additional tailoring was required. I mentioned a while back that I entertained the idea of getting custom-tailored suits. Well, in the end, all the suits, complete with pants, ties, belts, shirts, etc., for all four of us, it cost a few $100 less than a custom-tailored suit would have cost just me. And you know what? We looked great. Unless you're a person who works in a job where you need a $1,000 suit, and if you are, I have no clue why you're watching this, surely every minute of your day is far too valuable to be watching something like this, go budget. Make sure it's not ill-fitting. If you've got a dark suit, no one can tell it's silk, cashmere, wool, or cardboard. Well, maybe cardboard. Save your money and spend it where it matters most. Honey did have a bit of a time getting the dresses, hair, and makeup all organized, calling in my support to chase people up to finalize their decisions. For the bridesmaids, they used one of those places where you can order multiple dresses, try them on, and return the ones that you don't like. You just have to make sure that you don't leave that until the last couple of months. Shipping times can be long and sometimes unreliable. Get it done early. I said to no one in particular. Honey went out and found her dress, mother's in tow. Thankfully, she found one that she loved very quickly. If I recall, I believe she said it was the second dress she tried on. She went to a couple of shops afterwards, but upon realizing that nothing else took her fancy as much as that dress, she went back and immediately purchased it. She then had to have it resized a bit, cleaned, and with some adjustments done, and all of that took a bit of time, but the dress was complete and secure well in advance of the wedding. Though I did have to make a bit of an effort of avoiding it. I didn't want to see it before the wedding day. Something that wasn't included in the outfits was Honey's tea ceremony dress. I actually went out and purchased that with her, along with my now mother-in-law. I briefly entertained the idea of wearing a Chinese-styled tea ceremony outfit, but then I decided against it. A suit was going to work fine. Hair and makeup is another beast entirely. Because we had to start so early in the morning due to the door games and tea ceremony, that also meant hair and makeup had to start early. Some estimates from vendors said that they were going to have to start as early as 3 a.m. Thankfully, the one that Honey settled on ended up starting at around 5 a.m. And not for her. The bride is done last, so her makeup lasts the longest. The bridesmaids also decided to do their own makeup, which cut down on the time required. Really, that's only a brief summary of the hullabaloo, and I was mainly involved since I needed to put it all in the SACRED RUNSHEET. But boy howdy, make sure you book that stuff in advance. Vendors were starting to get a little scarce when we finalized the hair and makeup department. As was the wedding car, another thing missing from the run sheet. When Honey said she wanted to have a wedding car, not for the whole day, just between the ceremony and reception, and mainly for some photos, I panicked only slightly. I called about a half dozen vendors and all said that their cars were all unavailable. Then we got a recommendation from some friends who had gotten married several months prior, and thankfully we snuck in our booking. But literally while I was finalizing it, I was informed that 2 other weddings had called that same day for our wedding date. So yeah, wedding cars, book those in super early apparently. And to wrap up the bridal party section, we didn't have a flower girl, and we just made my best man the ring bearer. Moving on to guests. In the end, most unfortunately, the majority of Honey's family that lived abroad were unable to make it to our wedding, though thankfully her father, the main reason we had delayed the wedding so long, was. However, that did mean that there was far less only speaking Chinese speakers at the wedding. While we did toy with the idea of having someone translate our speeches into Chinese and giving it to our foreign guests, because there were so few in the end, we relied on the English-speaking members of the family to translate for them in real time. I also put together a gift registry. I ended up using With Joy's registry system as it allowed cash gifts and gave options to reserve items without needing to purchase them via their site, having a cash on the day option. Honey and I didn't really need much physical stuff. We're all about the time-honored tradition of red pockets. But so the Westerners didn't feel put off, I ended up filling the gift registry with items that we wanted to do for our honeymoon. That way, cash gifts could be put towards specific items on our honeymoon, things like Tokyo Disneyland tickets, or a really nice dinner, or the Poop Museum, which I highly recommend. I also set up a PayPal Me since that was the only non-American option I had for digital payments. It was relatively simple to set up, though for some reason some guests gave in Aussie dollary dues and others in American dollars. I'm not sure what caused that, but oh well. I'll touch briefly on the tea ceremony. So our original MC for the tea ceremony had to pull out due to a sudden thing coming up that she was unable to get out of. That was stressful. Thankfully, she was an absolute unit and wrote out every little thing that needed to be done. Everything that needed to be said in the order of which it was done. Our reception MCs were then able to take it from there, pretty much reading it all verbatim. The OG MC also assisted in getting the tea, the cups, and all that jazz. She was great. It was Honey's parents that ended up setting up a lot of the decorations on the house for the door games though, but I think they were happy to contribute. My own parents were a little stressed out about the tea ceremony. My mother had made the mistake of over-preparing, watching YouTube videos of Western families not seeming to take the ceremony as seriously as the Chinese family, and overall being disrespectful. Since this was the first time my parents were meeting much of Honey's family in person, including her father, this was the absolute last thing in the world that they wanted to happen. Though, as a result, they ended up getting a bit too inside their own heads, psyching themselves out just a little too much. We managed to calm them down somewhat, walk them through what needed to be done, and made sure that they, as well as my grandparents, were all prepared on the day. And now, the final quadrant, the reception. Let's mark the easy things off first. The venue had a dance floor, we didn't need to worry about that. It was only fitting that our first dance be to Ed Sheeran's Perfect because I proposed with it. At the end of it all, Honey and I couldn't be bothered to choreograph anything, and so we practiced a twirl or two and resigned ourselves to swaying in time with the music. As I mentioned earlier, we've got ourselves a lovely pair of MCs, a couple of Honey's friends. For the decorations, we used the same florist that we used for the ceremony, and Honey figured out, along with collaboration from Mum once again, that the types of flowers, the types of vases, and so on and so forth. I discussed with the band the music situation when it came to when they weren't playing. They had their own playlist for the in-betweens when it came to during dinner, and I put together a Spotify playlist for the dance floor. Now, I spent a decent amount of time on this playlist, making sure there was a good mix of songs that both Honey and I enjoyed, making sure we had nice iconic songs from our relationship, and all other songs doing a listen through and lyric check to make sure they were all oozing the positive vibes. I probably spent a bit too long of it, to be frank. Honey and I put together a seating plan that made sense and communicated it to the venue, who in turn created the signboard. The seating plan signboard was actually covered by the reception package, so that was convenient. I did have to create the seating place cards though, along with the ceremony booklet and signboard. The table gifts were tied to the place cards, which were a nice little batch of homemade cookies, once again prepared by the absolute hero of this whole experience. As a side note, I actually used a nice leafy graphic from Officeworks for the signboard, place cards, and ceremony booklet to give it a nice consistent look. I had everything printed off at Officeworks as well. However, when it came to the signboard, when the leafy graphic was blown up, this thing was going to be on an A2 piece of cardboard, it went all low res, so I used the art skills I had acquired through the last few years of doing this channel to watercolorify the graphic so that it looked nice in a high definition. It worked really well. I'm so happy with how it turned out. It makes me really happy that the skills I've been picking up during the course of the We Attempt New Things channel actually came into play and made an important day even better. Speaking of which, speeches. Our parents, the bridal party, and the two of us were all going to do speeches, though I was warned that nobody likes long speeches, so I refined my speech into a tight 3 minutes, had someone that I trusted review it, that wasn't able to make it to the wedding, and made some other adjustments. Honey struggled with her speech, so I made her a guideline to follow, leaving the parts out for her parents, my parents, and myself, so she could fill them with words that came from her heart. She ended up rewriting most of it, but she at least kept the framework. Then it was a case of figuring out all the times and putting it in the SACRED RUNSHEET. When guests would arrive, when canapes would be served, when the band would start playing music, when the bridal party would arrive. When would each course be brought out? When would the band start and finish each music set? When would the speeches be? When do the time limits on our contracts with the photographers and videographers run out? What photos do we need to take before they scoot? When do we cut the cake? Honey organized the cake, by the way. Another thing that I mentioned before was missing from the SACRED RUNSHEET. Eventually, we figured it out, shared it with the band, the venue, and the MCs. And the day was set. Plans were laid. Everything was paid for, or at least the money was put in envelopes to be given to the right people on the day. The day before, we spent setting up everything, transporting all of Mum's home-cooked food to the venue, putting up the decorations, doing the practice with the band, running through the aisle song. Honey went to stay with my parents, that's where the door games were going to be held and where the hair and makeup was going to be done. I went home to Nugget, who was wondering where Honey was. Eventually, I managed to go to sleep. And that's where I'm leaving it. By the night before the ceremony, the plan had been filled from this to this. There are many items that weren't included in the original plan, but don't worry, in the finale I'm going to show the final plan, the updated version with all my learnings, and most importantly, I'm going to run through the day itself. What went wrong? What went right? What was unexpected? How many times I cried like a little baby blob? But that's for the finale. Thank you for joining me on my wedding journey. I'm married now, but I enjoy looking back and writing these scripts. Even though I leave some details vague for anonymity purposes, I'm glad that I'll have these videos to look back on. I'm glad I can share it with you, because it's not I attempt new things, it's we attempt new things. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a fruitful day.